right? It's an affective means of suggestion, or more forcefully, control. It's not really effective a tool for control. Specifically, propaganda isn't. People could debate this point, and I would be interested in entertaining that debate. That's not a problem. But the idea is, there's obviously clearly more effective means of dominance and control than propaganda, right? The role of propaganda is to influence, right? It is an affective system of influence, right? When we talk about propaganda, it is an affective, right? It's an affective system. The role of propaganda is to effectively, right, to influentially make suggestions throughout the population that lead to consequences that are beneficial to whoever's in power, whoever is in the process of propagandization. In terms of intelligence then, what intelligence does and now we'll get to specifically the function, what intelligence does in terms of propagandization requires that those within the intelligence community who seek to construct, to create propaganda, understand the community. Thus, you can't really have good propaganda without communal understanding of how the community operates. So if it's the case that you want to sabotage the Black Panther Party, if it's the case that you want to sabotage the death metal scene, if it's the case that you want to sabotage the fill in the blank with your favorite group of individuals that need to be sabotaged, you need to understand the functioning communally of those people. In terms of that understanding, you can then manipulate the biases, the weaknesses, the hubris of members within the community in order for the community to conform or to self-destruct. And you can fill in the blank, right? So, I mean, it's dirty work. Somebody's got to do the dirty work. But the idea is there really isn't an effective propagandization without a very, very, very detailed and complex communal understanding for what I would label as the target, right? Whoever the target community is, you don't propagandize necessarily against an individual. It's more slander. Propaganda is a tool against collective bodies, not individual bodies, for the most part. And the idea is in terms of the construction and the creation of propaganda for the control of, for the regulation of, for the disablement or pacification of a collective grouping of people, propaganda requires an understanding of community, right? It requires an understanding of community. So, lastly, is that, right? It's propaganda requires communal understanding. Again, I'm not explaining this as though it were exhaustive, just to give you a rough conceptual framework with which you can come to your own understanding as to how this might be implemented, as to how historical examples might, obviously, I mean, Nazi Germany's use of propaganda has been huge. United States against African Americans in terms of the height of lynching, obviously, were, I mean, there's always going to be suggestive, affective systems in place to try and control the way in which individuals or groups or the entire nation, depending on how powerful the propaganda system is, think about others, perceive information, come to know and such. Okay, so that's number one. Again, I don't want to spend an exorbitant amount of time on that. That should be sufficient. Number two, political activities and influence. This is a quote, right? Quote, behind the scenes election campaigns against adversaries providing money and advertising for friends, right? It's political influence. It's politics 101. I mean, this is politics 101. I'm really not going to spend much time on this because it's, it is the regular. P-O-L-I-P-O-L-U-E-N-C-E, sorry. Political influence, again, I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on this. It's sort of self-explanatory. It's the behind the scenes, right? It is in case, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, well, I don't know how much time I want to spend on that, but the idea is it is a recognition of an objective, it is a recognition of a goal, of a directive, and it is the understanding of the means with which that directive, that goal, will be attained. So if it's the case that we're talking about domestic and international sort of political activity, political interest, political influence, the idea is, what is the objective? If it is directed towards an individual person, and we want to make sure that this individual person, for whatever reason, conforms to some set of beliefs or some rules or some expectations that we have, we, members within the intelligence community, try to implement whatever needs necessary in order to get that person to fall in line. And you fill in the blank with whatever that could mean. In terms of something which is probably more practical, and it happens far more frequently, not just within the United States. Remember, this lecture series isn't about just the United States at all. It's about intelligence, period. Is a relationship, is an understanding with those outside of the domestic jurisdiction, without those outside of the state's borders, those internationally. And there is an attempt to influence the ways of lives of people who live outside of your country, my country. I mean, it would be ridiculous to think that there isn't a way. There is no commerce. Let's just be vague, and not even vague, that's pretty specific, but just let's be sort of mundane and boring. But that's the whole point of commerce, right? The whole point of commerce is to influence outside of your borders, and within, but definitely outside. Quick side note, and then I'll move on from number two, because I'm not really interested in number two much. I was listening to NPR the other day, maybe 2 days ago, and they said that within the next X number of years, I don't know, 10 to 15 years, China's middle class is going to have 1 billion people. And I was like, I know I must have misheard that wrong. 1 billion people in the middle class? Holy crap. Now, that can be good or bad depending on how you look at it, and I'm not here to debate the point. But in terms of influence, there should be an obvious recognition that there is going to be an enormous potential for consumption in terms of capitalism, in terms of Chinese middle class. And we had better figure out what it is that they like, what it is that they want, what it is that their needs are in terms of consumption, and not just the United States, but the world's manufacturing community had better comport their actions in accordance with this enormous growing potential for capital. I mean, if I did hear correct and they did say that the middle class in China is going to be 1 billion people, the good aspect of that growth in middle class in China means that their consumption is going to increase exponentially, which means that they're going to have a tremendous need for goods and services, which means that those individual companies and those countries that are best equipped to facilitate those needs stand to themselves gain tremendously. So this has to do with interest. It is in the interest of, it would be undeniable. I mean, I guess I did get a little technical. I didn't anticipate to get technical, but because I wanted to move on from this one. But in terms of number two, it would be ridiculous to think that it's not in the interest of every single nation in the world to take note of the growth of the Chinese middle class. I mean, you would be foolish to overlook the tremendous opportunity, in a good sense, that it presents, right? It can be good or bad depending on who you talk to and how you frame it. Okay, next, economic disruption. Or economic disruption, right? Economic disruption. And this is counterfeiting foreign currency, and so on and so on. It's not just as explicit as counterfeiting currency. That's obviously the case. Sort of hyperinflation as a consequence of oversaturation, intentful, systematic oversaturation of capital within national borders, right? So you print off tremendous amounts of funny money, you fly your B-52 bombers over the nation, you drop, billions of dollars worth of capital, the money is valueless. You cripple the system. That's sort of an archaic model, to be honest with you. I've done a lecture series in my National Security Affairs Series 1, the first installment, and we talked about sort of hot money transactions, hot market. We talked about that. In terms of hot money investments,